What's up, everyone? I've finally got the time to listen to the Props podcast with Ryan Condal and David Mandel, and I don't know. I got a couple things that I could talk about. I kind of made a video earlier, and that sort of screwed myself because I could have waited and included a lot more of my thoughts, but the mentioning of House of the Dragon isn't necessarily enough to make a video in of itself. It would have been that same length. I just didn't listen to it. I was going on a clip that I heard on Reddit, and I listened to the whole thing now. But I can include it at the beginning of this video. But before I jump into that, I'm going to actually have a purpose for this video, and it's actually to break down maybe the first 20 or 25, maybe 30 pages of the Hedge Knight. It's obviously my favorite novella that goes along with the Song of Ice and Fire. Like the series House of the Dragon, that's like my favorite event in Targaryen history. Really in all of a Song of Ice and Fire history. I'm sorry. It's got the dragons, it's got the titties, it's got everything we need. So I'm going to discuss the graphic novel for Dunk and Egg. But before I jump into any of that, please do me a massive favor to sort of combat YouTube's algorithm. It really helps my channel out. Make sure you subscribe and turn those notifications on. And also, leave me a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts about the Dunk and Egg graphic novel and about your thoughts about the George R. R. Martin guest appearance on the Props podcast. And then also, slap a like on this video. Like goal is going to be 42069. that was a joke. Get it? Long nights! Alright, so now with that out of the way, there's three different things I wanted to mention for the Prop podcast, and then we'll jump into breaking down the Dunk and Egg graphic novel. The first thing is that I think, I made the video on it earlier, so I'll spend the least amount of time talking about this, and that's George said there's going to be 17 dragons. That's obviously a rough estimate. Nothing that anybody says, including the actors for the TV show, unless we've already seen it on screen, when we're getting summations about stuff or their opinions on how scenes are going to go down, or how they think the audience reception of the scene is going to go down, right? You sort of take that, how you want to. Don't take it verbatim. That's exactly. So if we don't see 17 dragons in the first season, it's going to, no. I saw people were getting mad about the fact that there's supposed to be, a certain amount, and that this means that since George said 17, everyone thinks it's all in the first season. So that confirms they're starting at this year of the timeline. Nope. You can take the book and throw it in a blender, right? I'm not saying take pieces of the book out of the blender. I'm just saying throw that book in the blender, put the lid on it, and hit fucking puree. And then pour it into a cup. Drink it, and that'll be 7 to 10 years down the line when the series is ended, right? So things are going to be adapted properly, but the timeline is going to be mixed up. One thing that does get everyone excited, properly excited, of course, is that they're taking their time. They're telling the story the right way, right? So we're getting flashbacks. They seem to be concurrent. Two of the cast members have been named as these are playing younger versions of the main cast, so that means they will be spending a decent amount of screen time, at least in the first season. So it's just, I don't know. You don't take 17 dragons if we don't see 17 different dragons on screen. It'll be, a disappointment. One thing that George did say that I think most of us agree with is that these dragons have to be distinguishable. There's so many of them, you can't just go, oh, there's another fucking dragon. No, there's a bright red demon. Caraxes. There he is. You know what I mean? They have to be distinguishable. We have to be able to realize that certain colored dragons have certain personalities, but specifically their riders connect with these dragons in a certain way. So you could not only learn about the character on screen and the dialogue and history and events that they talk about and converse with other characters, but you can also learn about their dragon, right? So I'm sure we're going to get dragon on dragon scenes by themselves, maybe disconnected with the writers. There's this storyline is so crazy that certain dragons and their writers are friendly at first, and obviously this is Game of Thrones, so at the end of the story they aren't, so their dragons have to sort of face off with each other, right? So it's going to be intense. Don't necessarily take everything everyone says, and then let yourself down. And then the next thing that I wanted to mention was how I just noticed, just listening to Conduit and George R. Martin converse in this podcast, and then I've heard Condell talk about George in previous episodes of this Props podcast, and then also I've listened to an interview from, I think it was IGN back in 2016, and as soon as I heard that was like the first interview that ever existed with the two of them, and I remember listening to that in 2019, and there's a video up here on YouTube, actually, of me reacting to it. I basically called it, like, they kind of confirmed it. It's basically saying, like, yeah, we're good friends. We've been friends for a while. We've been working on this series for a while, and George specifically headhunted Ryan Condell, so to speak, because he knew he was such a fan, right? So you can just tell that they not only have an interest in George's work, but they also have outside interests. So they bond on a deeper level. It's not just like, hey, George, let me suck your dick. I love your show. Oh, Jon Snow, Daenerys. No, he's not. He actually is a genuine friend with them, right? So that means that it's not something that's like, let me try to make the most money out of this. It seems more like I don't want to disappoint George, is Condell's attitude going into this. And then lastly, and I kind of agree with this, George said he stopped reading comic books because they reboot too much. He's like, if I read all those fucking issues before this issue, they don't count because he blew it up, right? And he said Spider-Man specifically, right? So they're always rebooting stuff. And that's another reason why I haven't covered the comics more on my channel, specifically Marvel Comics, DC Comics. For one, Marvel Comics, I find interesting, but I think DC Comics are way more entertaining. Obviously, Marvel's movies take the fucking gambit, but DC Comics are just more interesting, right? They're not afraid to appeal to like a darker, wider audience. Now, obviously, individual comics, like my favorite comic book that I just started reading recently is obviously Invincible. That show came out on Amazon out of nowhere. I had never heard of that fucking thing. It just popped up on my radar, and I'm like, hey, let me watch this. This looks cool. And it blew my fucking mind, right? So the comic books are really good. And I actually listened to Comics Explained here on YouTube, or he also has Geek Culture Explained too, but he's broken down like the Virtualamite Roar, like it's fucking intense. But anyway, jumping right into this, I just wanted to say that last thing because I agree with George. Like it's hard to get it too much into comics because they reboot it, so it's like it's crazy. Like you start reading an arc and then it doesn't count because that version of that character dies, and it's like too much. All right, so jumping right into the Hedge Knight. All right, now I'm not exactly familiar with these, and if I can learn how YouTube treats these videos in their algorithm, meaning like they'll still allow me to monetize it for making these videos, I'll do more of them. But for right now, I'll include like a little breakdown at the beginning, and then I'll try to, tell you what's happening on the actual page without saying the words too much, right? So I think that's what triggers YouTube algorithm. You basically show the pictures and just read the words on them, right? So you kind of have to do what Comics Explained does, which is break down the story and show you the images at the same time. So this is obviously from Jet City Comics, and this is George R. Martin's The Hedge Knight. This is a prequel graphic novel, a comicalization. It's from George R. Martin, and then some of the other, I believe they are obviously the artists are Avery Miller and Crowell. And then I guess jumping right into it, there are a few pages of art that I'm going to show because they're really good. But that was obviously Duncan, the first image. Oh, so here we go. The adaptation was by Ben Avery. We have a couple of extra illustrations there. I'll link this website down below in the comic in the description, and I'm going to try to save up and buy the actual paperback. Is only like $11, but the hard copy for some reason is $210. It's like it's a book of art, so I guess it costs a lot. This is another one from Mike S. Miller. That looks amazing. The comic style, really, this type of art style, I think, is perfect for graphic novels. I follow someone on Twitter named Mike Raposa, and he does a lot of really like old school Castlevania style art for like different things like Pokemon, all different types of shit that I'm into. But and this is like an alternative cover, and this is the artist is Michael Kaluta. But I think this next one is where the story starts. All right, so yeah, so on the first, like, this graphic novel basically starts out with, like, we have a tall individual standing in a grave. We see someone in the background who's laying at a tree, and that's Ser Arlan of Pennytree. And Dunk is thinking to himself, and he thinks, like, well, this old man had a long life, you know? He was closer to 69, get it, than he was to 50. And, you know, at this time period, in the medieval time period, you know, Dunk is obviously using a wooden fucking shovel here to dig dirt in the rain, so, you know, the ground is soft. But how many men can say that they live to be 69 years old? Not that many. So, you know, this is where the story starts, with death. This is most likely how the story ends, because in this world, that's the only thing that's certain. Well, in the real world too, but continuing on here. Dunk starts to think to himself, you know, I imagined this would be kind of different. He thought that Ser Arlan died, you know, the way he lived as a Hedge Knight. He would basically, if you're unaware of what a Hedge Knight is, they're similar to, in the Star Wars universe, a bounty hunter, right? So they don't necessarily have one loyalty to one house or one castle, one keep, one lord per se, but whoever's paying them. That's where their loyalties lie. And they are knight, so they do have the traditional standards of a knight, which means they don't go around raping and murdering and pillaging. They have standards and morals, but it's sort of like, if you can, you know, you got gold. They're not as savage as witchers though, but they would, you know, take service from with this lord, that lord. They would fight their battles. They would go throughout their territory and settle disputes. They would stay at their castles until that work was done. Then they would obviously move on to whatever was next. There was a couple tourneys that would come up. They often got to live sort of like the high life, but not actually having to deal with, like, you know, whatever the problems would be for owning your own castle. Like they did, but once that problem was solved, they got sort of their gold and they got to move on. It's not like someone like House Stark, right? So Jon Snow is a bastard. The role that Jon Snow plays in House Stark is sort of like living on the outside. So Jon kind of gets treated as though he's part of the family, but it's difficult, right? There's a lot of nuance to it. So that's similar to what is going on with the life of a Hedge Knight. I'm not saying that Jon Snow is similar to the life of a Hedge Knight. No, but I'm saying there's a lot of nuance to being a Hedge Knight. So you get to take care of the Lord's problems, but you also live, you know, a bit of the good life, which is tourneys. You get to participate in tourneys, and that's one thing Ser Arlan will find out. You know, is kind of like was a pretty solid Hedge Knight. He ended up getting to face off against the Prince of Dragonstone at one tourney specifically, and for those who are unaware, the Prince of Dragonstone, that title, and also Princess, Rhaenyra holds that motherfucking shit, that's a title specifically given to someone who is next in line to rule all 7 kingdoms, rule the Iron Throne, rule in King's Landing, right? So Ser Arlan fought one of those dudes in a tourney. We'll find out who that is later on. But Ser Arlan, you know, Dunk is still thinking to himself, and this is sort of like in a daydream state after he's burying Ser Arlan of Pennytree. But he says, of course, Ser Arlan had not ridden tilt since he faced off against, you know, the Prince of Dragonstone. They ended up riding against each other several times. I think it was seven different times. Dunk thinks to himself. No matter, although he lost, to Ser Arlan himself, it was a victory. How many different men can say that they broke 7 different lances against a Prince of Dragonstone? Not many. That's the mentality that Dunk has when he's burying Ser Arlan in the previous pages, right? How many men can say they lived to 69? Not that many. Not that many in this time. So that's one thing we'll learn about Dunk's character that he learned from Ser Arlan of Pennytree. You might be stubborn, Dunk thick as a lunk and as a tough as an aurochs or some shit like that. I forget the phrase because I haven't read the book in a few months. But actually, I did a live stream where I broke down, I think, the entire first novella. So the Hedge Knight, where I broke it down in a live stream. It's like 25 minutes. That's on my channel. It's from a couple months ago. But, you know, basically Dunk learns from Ser Arlan how to keep a positive mindset. And look at like the glass half full. At least he might have died on the side of the road, but he lived to be a really old person. Ser Arlan, of course, Dunk thinking to himself. But he also got to, do something crazy like fight the Prince of Dragonstone. Obviously, it was an attorney and it was sort of like friendly, but not necessarily. These jousts are crazy. So very few men can say they've done with certain things that Hedge Knights get to do. But sort of just continuing on here. Remember, the main thing to take away from Dunk after visualizing all of this stuff is that he's still sort of upset that Arlan dies on the side of the road. Ser Arlan, his mentor, the person who you could argue kind of saved his life, it died reigning on the side of the road, not in a great battle where he thought he should have, or an attorney, or, basically doing things that Hedge Knights do. Continuing on here. And then Dunk, at this point, he's ready to sort of move on from burying Ser Arlan. So the thoughts that are going through his head are, Ser Arlan used to watch the sunset, and he would say to me, "Another day done. Who knows what the morrow will bring?" Dunk? And Dunk is thinking to himself, the one after had brought wet, gusty winds and a next chill. It's hard to break down these images without, reading them. It sort of throws me off. I spend so much time sidetracking on the other pages. Obviously, I read these ahead of time, but it's just hard to do that now because I got so sidetracked, so I forget what exactly happens in these images. But basically, to just summarize here, Dunk ends up leaving, and he ends up taking his sword and his shield, I believe. He says, "I'll leave your sword, but it would rust in the ground." Basically, he's not just the type of person that would steal from the dead, right? So he pays his respects. He's saying, "I'll get more use out of it than leaving it here to rust in the ground. I wish you didn't die, sir. The gods will give you a new one, I guess." Basically in the afterlife, saying to him, "Look, you'll get another sword for whatever lies next. This part of your journey is over. You were a true knight. You never beat me, even when Dunk deserved it," which is a big thing because people didn't exactly use words back then. Excuse me. Holy shit. They just walked up and smacked the fuck out of you. That was easier to do. I don't have time to talk. Jeez. Whoa. I'll try to edit all of this out. I can't believe I just swallowed water down my fucking windpipe. But yeah, so, another thing of note is that Ser Arlan is taught Dunk when to use force, right? So Dunk thinks to himself, one of the last things he thinks about Ser Arlan before sort of closing off that chapter. Obviously, he thinks about him the rest of his life, but before closing the page on that book, he thinks to himself, well, look, he didn't even beat me, even though I deserved it. So Dunk knows from Ser Arlan that he should have gotten beat, but the fact that he didn't makes later on in Dunk's journey sort of hesitant to do certain things, right? So that lesson is very valuable at this time. So use force when necessary, but just remember that sometimes when you do that, there may be another way to handle it, right? So I might be overly breaking this down. I don't know. But continuing on to the next page, and this will actually be the last one. I think this video at this point is, it's pretty long. I think we're almost at 20 minutes. So this next page will be the last one. And like I said, if YouTube's algorithm allows these types of videos to be posted and still be monetized, I'll do more of them. But yeah. So this is him sort of it's sunset, obviously, now. So Dunk is with Sweetfoot, and he has 2 horses. He ends up having to sell one of them, and he thinks to himself, if I sold Thunder and Old Chestnut and the saddles and the bridles too, I'd come away with enough coin or enough silver to... No, he can't do that. The life of a Hedge Knight is really the only life he's ever known, and if he could find another Hedge Knight in need of a squire, then he could maybe... tend his animals and clean his mail. Or, he thinks to himself, he could go to Lannisport or King's Landing and join the city guard. Or, and I'll break down the next page too, because I want to leave you on a cliffhanger there. It fits my grip, he thinks to himself. He's holding Ser Arlan of Pennytree's sword. God, this artwork is gorgeous. And there is a tourney at Ashford Meadow, he thinks. That's obviously where our buddy's going. The old man left 3 silver stags. Enough, Dunk thinks to himself, for a really delicious meal. That's one thing that Martin spends a lot of time writing in his work as a side thought here is describing food to the point where if you're slightly hungry while reading, you'll be fucking starving by the time you finish. Tyrion specifically, and Tyrion's like one of my favorite characters to read about. But Dunk thinks to himself, I can have a good meal. I can get some ale, and even if I wanted to, I could get extra hammered. He notices there's this warm yellow light sort of spilling from this inn, the windows, and it seems very inviting. He thinks to himself, he needs to really be conservative with his money here, though. He can't just like go all willy-nilly because he doesn't have very much of it, right? And it's not even really like the things, the belongings, the horses that he has aren't necessarily his. He was the squire to Ser Arlan of Pennytree. Dunk himself wasn't officially a Hedge Knight. I don't think... No, he doesn't. He tells everyone that he was knighted, but he wasn't. Ser Arlan died before he could do this. While I would have liked nothing better after a good warm meal than a soft straw mattress and a roof above my head, the ground, he thought to himself, remember, he's being conservative with this coin here, would better suffice. And then he looks over and he notices there's this naked little shiny boy crawling out of the river. And he thinks, like, I want my palfrey. He's like, that's obviously the stable boy, right? So how many naked kids are going to be bathing in the river outside of this inn? This is obviously the stable boy. Now, if you've read the story before, you know that's a Targaryen shaving his head because he's on the run. Aegon, the unlikely, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but Dunk doesn't know that yet. So he's like, aye, stable boy, tend to my fucking horse and tend to my fucking sword and, like, rub them down and, like, give them oats and whatnot. Can you tend to them? And he's like, I could if I wanted to. One thing I love about this art is the accuracy, the coloring of the Targaryen, of Dunk's eyes. Of Egg's eyes and his eyebrows. He's obviously shaved his head at this point, but that's what Targaryens are supposed to look like. I'll have none of that. I'm a knight, I'll have you know. Like, Dunk is obviously being or Egg is obviously being a smartass to Dunk, and Dunk is like, look, I don't know if you know this, but I'm a fucking lumbering, giant, towering dude, and I'm not going to put up with your mouth. It's one thing relating back to what I was saying about not hitting Ser Arlan not hitting Dunk when he should have. There's several times, at least right now, when Dunk is under the impression that this is the stable boy and he's being a smartass. He's like, man, I could knock you the fuck out. You're basically supposed to be taking care of my horse and tending to my needs, but you're not doing that. So this is like showing that influence that Ser Arlan has on him. And Dunk is basically telling him, like, look, you better respect me. And he's like, you don't look like a knight, though. And Dunk's like, do all knights look exactly the same? Is there some knight template that I'm unaware of? Tell me, boy. And he's like, well, no, but they don't look like you either. Your sword belt is made of rope, for Christ's sake. Your shoes are made of shoelaces. And then he looks down at his feet and he goes, what are those? No, I'm just kidding. And then Dunk sort of retorts back and he's like, look, my shit does what it's supposed to. This rope belt holds my scabbard, and my horses, if you see to them, you'll get a copper. And if you do well, I'll give you that copper, but if you don't, I'll snock you upside the fucking head. And that's where I'm going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoy this kind of content, if you enjoy my videos, just do me a simple favor. Make sure you subscribe, turn your notifications on, and then slap a like on this video. The like goal is going to be 42069. Get it? Long night.